both of what they said. This is a putting the horse in front of the cart kind of an argument. You've got to change the law that creates the spending. So you've got to change the way entitlements work. You have to change the law that brings the spending baseline down and then enforce that with budget discipline, budget caps. And both parties messed up on deficit targets, discretionary spending caps. I've been pushing the caps issue ever since I got into Congress. And we've had a hard time. But you can't just put deficit caps in place or spending targets in place without fixing the underlying spending. So you got to do both. They won't work without the other. And so change the law on entitlements, change the law on discretionary to get the spending trajectory down, and then come in with a very rigid enforcement regime to make sure that we can enforce the discipline down the road to make sure that this thing sticks. That's how I see we got to do it.
Alice?
I agree with Bob, but I think one can also make a case for being a little bit conservative, especially on spending. There's no point in being so aggressive that you can't enforce it and you have to turn it around. But over the long run, if we grow the economy as fast as Larry thinks we're going to have plenty of room to do more things than we want to do. We just shouldn't be locked in to things that people decided now were necessary and that we find we can't afford in the future.
My one addition to what Congressman Ryan and Alice just said is, again, I have trouble just talking about spending, both substantively and politically. If I come back to these tax expenditures, let me give an example, and I don't want anyone to think that in this example I'm calling for cutting child care. I'm not, but it's a nice example. If you're a working poor family, you're a low-income family, you make $25,000 a year, child care costs are very high, you may be able, it's not an open-ended entitlement, you may or may not, but you may be able to get some assistance, a subsidy from the government to help with your child care costs. If you make $5 million a year, you qualify for a subsidy for your child care costs too. The low-income family gets it through a, quote, spending program. The high-income family gets it through a tax cut, a tax expenditure, a tax credit. Now, a subsidy is a subsidy is a subsidy. They're both subsidies. They're both spending. And when we get into this artificial thing where we just talk about...
But one is untouchable and one is not.
Yeah, it is a precise example of why, if you focus just on spending and you leave taxes to the side, what it means is that you're going to look at the programs that provide various supports and subsidies and assistance to low and middle income people primarily, and you're going to put to the side those programs that provide subsidies to corporations and high income people. They largely get their subsidies on the tax side. Low and middle income people largely get those on the spending side. Let's treat them all equally, put them all on the table, and that's why I get uncomfortable when I hear Congressman Ryan's discussion about it. One more thing. Some people say we agree we should reform a number of these tax expenditures, but they propose it as part of a deficit-neutral tax reform that doesn't provide any help at all towards long-term deficit reduction. Now, in 1986, I thought the bipartisan, led by Ronald Reagan, Tax Reform Act was great. But we can't afford another one like that. We need tax reform, but tax reform needs to contribute to deficit reduction, just as reforms in health care and other areas do.
Nira, and then Congressman.
So I just